Chapter 389, Nighthawk. The crimson moon outside the window was obscured by the clouds. Its moonlight that penetrated through the curtain barely outlined the large objects in the bedroom. The darkness and intensity became the main theme of the room. Klein sat in such an environment and was in no hurry to leave. He looked at the sleeping Dr. Aaron and began to analyze the images he had seen in the dream. Will Ossipton eventually held the Wheel of Fortune card in his hand, and in such a dream, everything symbolizes something. It's a revelation obtained by one's astral projection. In other words, Will Ossipton's matter is related to fate. Furthermore, that giant silver snake might very well represent the snake of Mercury. This child might actually be related to a high-sequence beyonder, be of the monster pathway, or some strange sealed artifact. Does his danger stem from the snake of Mercury, or the result of greed due to the strange sealed artifact? But the snake of Mercury is sequence 1. It's an existence closest to that of a god. Just its name on its own is an embodiment of his high level. It's impossible that he can't do anything to a child like Will Ossipton. That Ammon who is of an unknown sequence number, perhaps sequence 1, 2, or 3, could even invade the space above the gray fog with just an avatar. This matter doesn't seem to be that simple. There must be a huge secret behind his matter. At this thought, Klein had already decided to pull back completely. It's obviously a very dangerous matter. Furthermore, that tarot card might not be a mystical item. What's special might very well be Will Ossipton himself. Yes, apart from having nightmares, Dr. Aaron's troubles are already settled. There's no reason for me to get involved in it. To proactively act on this and challenge the impossible is nearly identical to suicide. Yes, I must follow what my heart tells me. Klein pushed the surface of the dressing table with his black-gloved right hand and slowly stood up. Having just entered the dream, he was completely convinced that Dr. Aaron's nightmare came from a revelation that his astral projection had received in the spirit world. And that revelation had been deliberately created and provided by a high-level existence. The paper crane was just a tool for locating him. According to a chapter in the Book of Secrets, Klein could also try to use the paper crane to find Dr. Aaron's astral projection in the spirit world and observe the source of the revelation. But he had already decided to not get involved. Stretching his body, Klein flipped through Dr. Aaron's leather wallet with the last of his curiosity, and he took out the paper crane. He placed the paper crane on the tip of his cane, and he held them simultaneously. Then, his eyes turned deep as he softly muttered to himself, Will Ossipton's current location. After the divination sentence was repeated 7 times, a breeze suddenly blew in the room, bringing with it a cool feeling as if it were blowing on one's soul. Klein let go of his right palm, and the cane stood firm before falling down with the paper cranes, pointing diagonally at the bed. There, Klein frowned and moved to another position. He repeated the divination and successfully received his feedback. And the intersection point of the 2 divinations was Dr. Aaron. Will Ossipton's position overlaps with that of Dr. Aaron. That's interesting. Klein said to himself, amused and amazed. His curiosity was piqued to the extreme. Although he didn't intend to get involved in this matter, he wanted to know why there was an overlapping situation such as this. Why don't I bring the paper crane above the gray fog for divination? With the gray fog's obstruction, there won't be any accidents. Klein quickly came up with a new idea. Since it wasn't convenient for him to summon himself in Dr. Aaron's bedroom, he decided to take the paper crane home first. He had actually long prepared for this. Before coming, Klein couldn't confirm the seriousness of the matter, and he had hoped to find Will Ossipton, seeing if he had the opportunity to obtain the tarot card. Therefore, he had prepared another paper crane to replace the real one. It made it easier for him to do all sorts of divination, and he could switch it back once the problem was resolved. As soon as he thought of it, Klein took out the paper crane he had prepared. He had deliberately folded it above the gray fog, just in case Dr. Aaron had suddenly decided to hand over anything related to Will Ossipton to the Church of Evernight, allowing his counterfeit to be divined. Taking into account the overall picture, and the details would make things much easier. Klein praised himself. With the help of the faint moonlight, he carefully compared Will Ossipton's paper crane and his to see if there were any clear differences. Upon comparing them, Klein immediately fell silent. His handicraft skills weren't even comparable to a child's. In fact, they're all paper cranes, so there isn't much of a difference. Mine is only a little cruder. As long as Aaron hadn't studied the original one carefully, then he wouldn't be able to tell that it has been swapped. Klein muttered silently to himself, took out a coin, and used divination to make a final confirmation. After receiving a revelation that confirmed this, he put his paper crane back into Aaron's wallet and returned it to its original position. He then took care of the scene, bringing Will Ossipton's paper crane along with him and left 3 Birmingham Road. With the help of the dowsing rod, Klein successfully returned home. While he was taking a bath, he summoned himself and brought the paper crane along with the master key above the gray fog. Sitting in the quiet and empty palace hall, he picked up the paper crane and carefully examined it for a few seconds, but he didn't discover anything abnormal. Then, with a pen and paper, Klein wrote the same divination sentence as before: Will Ossipton's current location. This time, he switched to using dream divination, and he was pleasantly surprised to see an image appear in the world of the gray fog. It was a dark room. A strong and dignified Will Ossipton leaned against the desk with the help of a chair by the window, and he looked out at the scenery with his pitch-black eyes. He held a stack of tarot cards in each hand, and beside them, there was a pile of wooden blocks. The wooden blocks formed a ring-shaped snake that connected itself from head to tail. The scene outside the window was just as dark, and there was the faint sound of flowing water. The dream ended here without a sound. Klein opened his eyes, tapped the edge of the long bronze table with his finger, and he said to himself, "That Ouroboros-like snake is indeed the snake of Mercury. That means it's the snake of Mercury which represents fate." There was the sound of running water outside the window. Does that mean that Will Ossipton's current position is close to the Tussock River? Previously, when I divined his position, was the overlap with Dr. Aaron caused due to interference by fate? Seeing that divination above the gray fog could only receive a revelation of this degree, Klein was no longer troubled by curiosity. He barely interpreted the situation and planned to exchange the paper crane tomorrow night. He would then find an opportunity to guide Dr. Aaron and have him go to the Church of Evernight to tell the bishop about this matter. It's best to leave such matters to the officials. Klein let out a chuckle and returned to the real world. After taking a leisurely bath, he didn't get busy and crawled into bed. After an unknown period of time, Klein suddenly realized that he was clearly dreaming. He was in the living room, reading the Book of Secrets. This familiar feeling. He turned his head to look at the door like he usually did. The door creaked open, and a figure in a gray coat walked in. He was about 30 years old, with a long, thin face with a broad forehead and dark blue eyes that looked intelligent. "It's not the captain." Klein suddenly gave a self-deprecating laugh, let out a silent breath, and turned the Book of Secrets in his hand into a copy of Ladies' Aesthetic. He flipped through the magazine, casually greeting the newcomer. The man in the gray coat took off his hat and sat down across him, seemingly casually asking him, "Aaron came to see you this morning." "It's really as a Nighthawk, a nightmare." Klein resisted the urge to sigh and replied with a smile, "Yes." He had already figured out why the Nighthawk had suddenly entered his dream. The nightmare in front of him was likely the captain of the Nighthawk's team responsible for the matter regarding Will Ossipton, but they had yet to find any useful clues up to date. In this case, Dr. Aaron and Detective Sherlock Moriarty's act of visiting to ask about Will Ossipton's whereabouts must have been made known to them last night or this morning. At the same time, they discovered that Dr. Aaron rushed over to Minsk Street, shortly after he finished his breakfast, to visit Detective Sherlock Moriarty. In the spirit of professionalism, entering a person's dream at night was the most natural and normal development. As for Dr. Aaron, his situation was rather sensitive, so rashly entering a dream might cut off clues, so there was no doubt that a certain detective became the first choice. "What did he encounter?" the captain of the Nighthawks team asked casually. Klein answered honestly, he had a nightmare. Klein described the pitch-black tower, the giant silver snake, and Will Ossipton under layers of protection and other scenes. Finally, he said, before this nightmare, Aaron had gone to Will Ossipton's place to find the child, partially because he was worried about his health, but also because he was puzzled over his bad luck. Unfortunately, the Ossipton family had moved away. However, Aaron recalled that the boy had given him a paper crane that the boy had folded himself and had wished him luck. Perhaps agitated by these two events, he had such a nightmare. The man in the gray coat looked pleasantly surprised. Paper crane. Yes, Klein nodded slightly. The child gave it to Aaron before he was discharged, and Aaron threw it into his office drawer. He forgot about it until last night. I understand. Thank you for your explanation. The captain of the Nighthawk's team stood up and bowed with his hand against his chest in a very polite manner. Suddenly, there was a ripple in the dreamland, and he disappeared from the room. Looking at the position where he had sat, Klein deduced what would happen next. The Nighthawks might go to Dr. Aaron's tonight and enter his dream for investigations and take the paper crane away. However, a question arose. The paper crane was folded by Klein, and the real thing was above the gray fog. Forget it, regardless of which paper crane they use, they'll never be able to divine the answer. It doesn't matter if I switch it back or not. Klein said to himself. He gathered his thoughts and continued to sit there. He wasn't in a hurry to leave the dreamland, and he stared blankly for a long time. After a while, the corners of his mouth curled up as he softly sighed. How nostalgic,